Does anybody know who John Thorpe is? Has anybody read The Information Paradox? Okay. The Information Paradox dates from the late 90s. Fabulous book. An instruction manual for where we are today. It's about technology-enabled evolution in business and government. I've been proud to call John a friend for more than 30 years now. We work together in an international consulting firm. We're having a video conference call yesterday morning, and I mentioned that I was coming to this conference, and John said, "So what is e-governance?" I said, "I haven't got a clue. I think it's an academia term that hasn't filtered its way out into the real world." But contrast that with the fact that a whole lot of interesting people in the IT arena have taken the term IT governance and then segmented it down so that I've actually heard people talk about disk drive governance. Okay, what the hell is governance all about? So that's what I'm going to try to cover as I get into this question of digital evolution. Tiny bit about me. I've been around for probably longer than Laurie, judging by the amount of grey hair. He hasn't torn most of his out, you see. Over the last 20 odd years, I've focused on the issues of taking organisations into the future at significant organisational level and in national contexts. In 2001, I started focusing on boardroom advisory. In 2003, I got involved in developing the world's first standard for governance of IT, which was developed and published in Australia in 2005. And then I transitioned from that to the development of the international standard ISO 38500, which is about governance of IT for corporations by its specific title. And it's fascinating when you put words like corporate in front of something, somehow it seems to narrow the application of the standards so that people can say, well, that doesn't apply to me. The ISO technical committee that looks after that standard set off on a mission in November last year to develop a roadmap for the evolution of that standard, and I'm delighted to be one of about half a dozen people with John Thorpe involved as well, who are developing that roadmap for ISO 38500, and that will become public property at a meeting in Paris in May, which unfortunately I can't attend. So let's go to an opening question. Who controls our use of business resources and our evolving capability of the businesses that we're involved in? Some will tell us that it's the finance director, because the finance director has the money. Some will tell us that it's human resources because they train and acquire all of the people. Others will say, well, it's all dependent on R&D. Yet others will say, well, it's about operational change. Some will say, and there's been a big push on this in recent times, it's all about marketing, and of course everybody knows that it's all absolutely controlled by IT because everything else depends on the IT. So who's actually meant to be in charge? If you have all of those forces trying to be individually in charge, what do you get? Not much. Yeah, that's right. So pull them all out, bang their heads together, and I'm sorry, this is not a gender neutral slide, it's just the picture that I found first. The board and the executive have to be accountable for making things happen, and I was fascinated in a presentation this morning about sanitation in India, where the cultural change across India that took them from 38% sanitation to 94% sanitation in a few years was led by the Prime Minister, led from the top. And we constantly hear the message, led from the top, but we don't often actually see it. Does anybody know what that is? It's about 30 minutes from here. It's called CIRAC. It's the oldest still intact computer in the world. Digital computer, I might say. There are analogue devices that are older than that. Compare CIRAC to what we've got in our pocket today. In terms of price performance, we are talking billions of times better. The technology has evolved at an extraordinary rate. Can you identify anything else that was in existence, let alone just invented, in 1947 that has improved its price performance by a billionfold? Think how good a train trip would be, or a plane trip. Digital evolution, I contend, began when the first digital computer was turned on and used to do something better than it could be done without the computer. Arithmetic. And in that first phase of computing, it was really about crunching the numbers. We moved on to the stage where we were expanding the scope of the business processes, business tasks that we could perform, and we're into data processing. The Australian government had a quaint term, it was ADP. It wasn't even electronic data processing, it was automated data processing. In the 90s and into the noughties, we started to expand. We were getting into enabling business change. We were extending the reach of organisations, we were lifting the scale, lifting the volume, and then from there to about 2012, we were really getting into serious business change and developing a whole lot of very specific purpose technologies that were only possible because of the extraordinary power that was coming to the forefront. And from 2012 onwards, we're into this era that people call digital transformation. Well, I'm sorry, but digital transformation started right back there. And if we look at it across that continuum, we save ourselves from the arguments as to whether the emergence of the mini computer or the microcomputer or the personal computer or the tablet or the internet or Wi-Fi, whether any of those things were the starting point. Because none of them were. Every one of them was just augmenting. Now, in terms of oversight and control, financial oversight was really the only thing that we had through the first 3 or 4 stages of evolution. Why? Because these things were extraordinarily expensive. We also had the emergence and development of IT management frameworks to enable people to do a better job of making sure that the thing worked okay. Early on, there started to be some business and organisational change, but that hit its straps from about the early 90s onwards, and we started talking about business process re-engineering. And about that time also, corporate governance started to come into vogue. The Cadbury Report in Britain, various other nations starting to put together codes of corporate governance, corporate laws and so on to control the way that organisations behaved. Then we had ISO 38500 emerge in 2008, but prior to that, the Australian standard in 2005, and now we're looking at the question of where does it go from here. Phase 1 of the digital era, I reckon, runs somewhere into the mid to late noughties, and now we're in phase 2. And how long will phase 2 last? I haven't got any idea. Are there phases beyond that? Probably, because digital technology is going to enable us to continually change for a long time. Now, ISO 38500 presents a model for governance of IT. A really, really simple one, and I'd love to say that it was constructed from first principles like this. It wasn't. It was a brain burst. It wasn't my brain burst, but I've been able to reverse engineer a model for understanding how that model actually works. 3 fundamentals of running a business. You plan it, you build it, you run it. You turn an idea into money. Running a business requires ongoing effective IT service. This is a little bit pre what people are talking about as digital era, pre-2008. Building the business requires business enabling technology capability. Absolutely true today, even more so. And the argument that I had some challenges getting people to understand early on was that planning a business requires an insight into what the information technology can enable you to do. I don't think there's much argument on that front anymore. But back then we had 2 domains and they were quite separate, except there was a problem. The people in the grey domain thought that they didn't know anything about IT, and so anything that used IT somehow became part of the blue domain. Oh dear, that's a problem. So it got muddled up like that. And we had the IT world running around telling business leaders that this is what they must do. And mostly, that didn't work. So we move on. We change the shape of the model a bit and we put governance into play. What the hell is governance? Well, governance is the oversight of management. That's one of the simplest definitions that you can come up with. And what ISO 38500 says is that there is an overall system for governance of anything where the governing entity, the governing function, oversees management. The interesting thing about an organisation is that governance can't function unless there is management. Because without management, governance has nothing to oversee. So the top level oversight, how do we actually look at that? And we do a little bit of reconstruction of our picture just to suit a shape that's been established in the standard itself. And we think about the planning and what planning tends to do for the governing body, which is thinking about business pressures and business needs and regulation and stakeholders, is that the planning proposes what the organisation's going to do with its use of IT. The governing body is supposed to evaluate the plans. Now, it's not quite as mechanistic as that, but essentially, and the governing body then gives the tick to what has been proposed, presuming that it thinks it's okay, sends back to management some direction, some strategy, some policies, some money, and management goes and builds the IT-enabled business change projects that will deliver the future operational capability of the organisation. So that model, along with that definition and those 6 principles, is the core of the ISO 38500 standard for governance of IT. What's wrong with it? Well, the first thing that's wrong with it is that despite a great deal of effort put into 3 successive minor edits of the standard, people still think that it's only for the IT people. That's like saying that the rules of the road are only for the guys who service the cars. Because it's not for the IT people at all. It's for the business leaders to guide them in making sure that everything works out successfully. So now let's go into the digital evolution space. This is my definition. It's ongoing and it's long term. It started a long time ago. It's going to happen for a long time to come. But it's rapid, it's disruptive, and it's changing society, it's changing the markets we operate in, it's changing business, it's changing government, it's changing everything. And it's enabled by the innovative use of the new digital technologies. Not the old ones, but you can see the roots of it back in the old digital technologies. Heck of a lot of what is currently new is in fact built on the backbone of what was old, what we built 10, 20, 30 years ago. The interesting thing is that it changes the established orders of control. Nothing has achieved that more than the mobile phone, the smartphone. It creates new perceptions of value and associated value propositions. And unfortunately, the first time that I presented this definition was a week before the Malaysian Airlines plane disappeared over the Indian Ocean. When I presented it the next time, people were already saying, how can you lose a great big aeroplane in this digital world when everything is connected? There were new expectations. They could find their iPhone if they left it somewhere. But we couldn't find a huge jetliner. Okay? Changed expectations. This evolution destroys pre-existing notions of good practice, and it comes around because we're exploiting new and evolving technology and we're creating these new and evolving expectations. So digital evolution is really fundamental change that's happening right throughout everything that we do, our entire lives and the economies that we live in. In order to achieve digital evolution, we need to think about something bigger than the IT. And capability is the space that I think is what's relevant. And this is what I'm pushing into the ISO group at the moment. We have an example of a health service, a hospital. And this is a very simplified version of a capability-based architecture for a hospital organisation. So overall, it manages and delivers a health service. It has to manage the hospital, it has to manage the finances, the assets, the infections, the human resources, has to provide treatment, has to have pathology, triage, rehabilitation. And all of these things are changing. Now, the little bits that have just popped up there, I'm not going to go into in this presentation because I had to squeeze it down a bit. But this is about a message around organisational change that is anchored in 1964. A US professor called Harold Leavitt researched organisational change, and what he's found was that if you try to change something in an organisation, change the way an organisation behaves or operates, you have to put balanced pressure on four fundamental aspects of the organisation. The people who are involved, the work that they do, the structure and rules in which they operate, and the tools and technology that enable them to do their job. And if you do what has been the classic failure of IT project after IT project after IT project and focus only on the IT, you will fail. And Leavitt's model proves it. So, in every case here, I'm talking about evolving capability of an organisation and the governance of that evolving capability. And if you want to have control over the evolution of an organisation, you have to have a framework in place to govern the way that it is actually evolving. And again, I'm fascinated by that Indian case study where the Prime Minister in effect chaired the governance of that massive natural culture change. Looking at pre and post digital from the pre-2010, say, pre-2012, Leavitt's model fits in that space, telling us that most of the change that we've been dealing with up until then was within the local space of the organisation that you're changing. But increasingly, it was encroaching into the external space. Simplest example is the ATM. The banks shifted the work to the customer, and they've kept on doing that, and the governance of change around online banking has driven that out. But if you think hard about what's happening now in the second phase of the digital era, There's a lot more players involved, and we'll work the onion in from the outside. There is this great unwashed public out there that we never ever used to worry about before. We were doing technology projects to change the way that we interacted with ourselves, so we didn't have to worry about the public. But now the public's got one of these, they've got Twitter, they can talk about us, and they can hack us and do all sorts of nasty things. We operate within a market. The market is not what we currently see as our market. The market is a great unimagined thing that is way bigger than most of us ever conceived, because the market has gone from your local reach that you had in the late 20th century to a global reach, to all sorts of variations in the definition of your market. Then you've got the regulatory space starting to flex its muscle in some areas where change has gone a bit out of control. Then you've got your customers who are empowering themselves and acquiring new savvy, and your suppliers who are trying to do something effective for themselves, and then you've got your own local space. And now map Leavitt's diamond across all of that, and you want to change the way that your business operates to be a digital era leader, you've got to take all of those 6 layers on the journey. So your digital evolution messes up everybody while everybody else is trying to mess you up. And it's not about the technology. The technology is a small part of the game. So take that model for governance of IT and reframe it for digital evolution. The first thing we'll do is put that backdrop in of the 6 layers of space where we change. Refocus the management discussion. We're now talking about the management of business evolution in the digital era, and I'm calling that digital leadership. What does governance of digital evolution look like? Well, we'll build that picture, but the input there is now our digital era plan, which, by the way, isn't a 5-year plan anymore. In fact, sometimes we're lucky if it's a 5-week plan. The digital evolution strategy, plans, policy coming from the board, they're not going to tell us what software to use or anything like that. Don't be silly. They're going to tell us whether they want us to actually take some significant risk, whether they want us to change fast, whether they want us to be a market leader or a mid-market player or a market follower. We're going to deliver digital evolution initiatives. We're creating digital business operations. Anybody been in the government sessions? The Digital Transformation Agency in the Australian government. This could describe their role. It could also identify what's not right about it. Feedback, digital era performance. Take into account market evolution and business evolution in the boardroom. Should always have been there. Now absolutely has to be in focus. So from ISO 38500's point of view, the future use of IT is driven by the digital evolution of the organisation and its participation in the evolution of the entire digital era marketplace, which is in absolute disruptive turmoil. So put the big box around that, and we identify a system for governance of digital evolution. And my proposal to my colleagues in the ISO group is that if we're governing digital evolution, we're talking about the system by which any organisation directs and controls its evolving purpose and capability in an increasing digital market. Shifted the emphasis away from technology as far as I think we possibly can. I'll just explore 2 of the principles. When we published AS8015, we suggested that organisations should establish clearly understood responsibilities for ICT. Goodness gracious me, I heard the term ICT being used today. That's an ancient term. We need to put the archaeology away and talk about today. When it evolved into ISO 38500, there needed to be a lot more clarity, because we'd realised that people didn't understand that simple statement about understanding clearly identified responsibilities. So we said individuals and groups within the organisation, it's not just it's the CIO's problem. They need to understand the responsibility for the supply of IT, which is what the IT people do, but the use of IT and the demand for IT, which is what the business does. Those who are responsible have to have the authority and a few other things that we left out, like the knowledge, the expertise, the time to do their job. I think that it needs to evolve to something like this. Everybody in the organisation understands and accepts that they have a responsibility for planning and building and using the digital technology-enabled business and its capabilities. Everybody's empowered with the competence, the authority, and all of the other resources that they need to do their job properly. That hasn't become part of the definition yet. It's where I'd like it to go. The strategy principle was really simple. It said plan your IT to best support the organisation. And I won't go into the incredible arguments that happened in Montreal about the word plan, but can I say again that the rabid right wing of academia got a hold of it. The organisation's business strategy takes into account the current and future capabilities of IT, and the strategic plans for IT satisfy the current and ongoing needs of the organisation's business strategy. We were still saddled with that quaint notion that you could have a separate strategy for IT to the business strategy, but we at least asked for them to be aligned. There was a little bit of evolution of that with the 2015 edit, but only by reintroducing the word plan to emphasise that strategy and planning are really two ends of the same fundamental sets of concepts. It's what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, etc. We need something different. I think we need to talk about our plans for our evolving business model and our capabilities, being informed by an understanding of how you can use the technologies to drive change and how everybody else is doing the same thing. So I'll take a leap from there. I'll give you some hooks in a moment to go and look at other propositions that I have in that space. But take those 6 principles now and cross them with the 6 spaces. And start thinking about how you could use that 36-point matrix to identify and think about what's going on and what could be going on as you're planning the evolution of your organisation and the market space in which you operate. Here are the tags, all on dealinst.com, a range of papers that I've published and some of my colleagues have published, and more coming on how to apply ISO 38500 to govern the digital transition of organisations. And even in the space of the 18 months that these papers have been evolving, you'll see how my thinking has evolved as well. And so there we are. I did that in 28 minutes and 55 seconds.
Technically, I'm filling in for Alex, who's a colleague of mine. So she was meant to be here, but I've stepped in at the last minute. So, yeah, it was... that was really good. Thanks, Mark. I guess from my perspective, just a bit of background about me. I work in cybersecurity. I've been in cybersecurity for about 20 years. When this topic came up around getting involved with it, my role and what I do day to day is working with the governance of cybersecurity and strategy, but also I have a good technical background, and my team and my business works through lots of different projects and engagements through businesses related to whether they're going through digital transformation or new products or services, or what they're working through from the perspective of technology and how security fits into that. So I was trying to make mental notes as Mark was talking then, and what I wanted to kind of cover off, but I guess I don't have a presentation, but I'm just looking here to add some perspective from a governance perspective, where I've seen security evolve over the last sort of 10 to 15 years around an IT issue to being a real company issue now. So as I'm really looking forward to, maybe what happens with this standard or how to communicate it. But I know the process that I go through with any business that we're working with, whether it's that I've actually managed security or that I'm working through, whether it's a small business or a large business, is that if security is not taken as a operational risk and it's not governed properly and it's just left to IT to manage, it's going to be a disaster. Security now in the world that Mark's just spoken about and everyone knows is technology is everywhere. It's not a part of just, we might have it. Everybody's using it. Every company's got some way, shape or form, whether it's through suppliers or directly related to their business. Technology is everywhere. So security now is a discussion that I have from it's not an IT problem, and more importantly, it's actually a significant issue around people and humans to understand what their role is and how they're working through it. So going back in terms of looking at incidents and things that have gone wrong from a technology perspective where security was related, and I say this at all the places that I'm working in when I talk about things, is security, every incident that has or will ever happen has been related to a human, related to security. And whether it's a board level or someone working on a piece of technology or different departments, this is a process that if we don't change the way we think about it, it's never going to get resolved. So a couple of things I'd like to touch on that we started to work through, again, what was being mentioned at the beginning around IoT coming through and where and how we're looking at the way to change different, the market and where we're involved. So from an IoT perspective, I've done a lot of work with utilities and looking at SCADA and real-time technologies where it's kind of the next step of evolution with IoT. And again, from how security is being discussed on an IoT level, it's on the agenda a little bit. It's starting to come up in some spaces, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. And again, looking at utilities as what's going to go wrong. If you look at any utility around Australia or around the world, for that fact, security is not a concern. And when you look at that space, that's a big problem. So if you're looking at it, whether it's a power company or a water company or whatever it might be, it's actually really disconcerting to know how insecure those businesses are and how the technology that's been in place for 10, 20, 30 years and how that's changing is, there's a problem. So obviously there's ways to protect it, and it does get protected, but the IoT challenge that's coming through is another thing to look at. How are we putting in the right level, again, from a governance perspective, to make sure that the right people are talking about this at the right levels? Because if it's just left to suppliers or people building products, I can guarantee it's not going to happen, which in that case, if you fast forward 5 to 10 years, it'll be a very interesting landscape from an IoT perspective. So look, I've got obviously a perspective to add around this topic. I was very interested in what Mark was saying then. Like I said, I was mentally trying to make a lot of notes that I'll probably pick up and talk about when we leave here that I can contact Mark about. But if there's any perspective that I can add, if anyone's got any questions, or I'm hoping there's maybe a little bit of interaction in terms of what people do and what they're seeing and how things are working, I'm looking forward to adding to it. So thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Do you want to take a chair? So just to liven things up a little bit, and throw a small hand grenade into the room, perhaps. Everybody knows who Tim Berners-Lee is, of course. He invented the World Wide Web, and on its 30th anniversary, a week or so ago, he put his hand up and said it needs fixing. He used the word dysfunction. I spent some time, as some of you would know, with Internet Australia, and one of the debates that's going on within Internet Australia, and which I think is relevant to e-governance, is do we as technologists wait for governments to intervene and fix the flaws with the internet or any kind of e-governance arrangements? Or do we need to actually step in and say, no, there are solutions? And so my question or my observation is, if the very, very clever people who invented the internet couldn't possibly foresee the ways in which it would be used, both positive and negative, can the very clever people who now run the internet fix the problems, or will we wait until governments overreact and make a mess of things?
My perspective is there's no chance that it can be fixed. It's the horse is bolted. The horse bolted decades ago. There has been talk, and there's ways to, if it was to be an internet V2, around how you could build in security. And I'm talking from a security perspective, by the way, because I look at all the bad ways the internet has impacted society and what it means, and to roll back out of that now is just, it's absolutely impossible. There's no chance. So moving into a new space, it would be, again, from a governance perspective, I don't see how practically that would work and how long that would take. And then again, being Mark and I were talking at the start around being very, yes, it's going to get broken, regardless of how much governance you put in or how much design goes in, or someone in some way, shape or form will work out vulnerabilities and flaws and how it comes together. So yeah, my perspective on that is absolutely not. There's no way to fix what's there. If there was a discussion and a debate to be raised about bringing up a V2 of the internet, there would be some hope in some level of trust and design through to make it a happy place for some time, but then it'll be a matter of functionality over, how that works, and then with more functionality it introduces more opportunity and more target area, so there'll be stuff that would go wrong. But I think from a technology perspective, you look at the industry I'm in, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry driving. I mean, Melbourne's now starting to look at it as an export opportunity to building new cybersecurity technology and getting involved. So there's lots of cool stuff that's happening. I've just come back from Israel, and the stuff that they're working on is crazy, and we're starting to work on it now. So there's lots of really cool tech, but it's always
some answers.
Well, for some point, because it's problems that we go, this is something we've been working with for 5-6 years. This piece of tech might now help work it. But then it comes back to people don't know how to use it, or they don't implement it properly. Technology is not the answer. It's about the next step of it and how it's going to be ran and be managed, and looking at how to move forward.
Do you want to hand the microphone over to the other Mark?
Thank you. I think that was the perfect segue point, and I think I saw a hand flicker then as well. Mark and I were talking about this, and my lament for some time has been that I wish that the guys who invented TCP/IP way back then had a better crystal ball, and then that Tim Berners-Lee and all of the others who've contributed to the development of what we know today as the internet had imagined for a moment the possibility that some people who used what they had created might not have the very best of intentions. And that's to me the core problem of everything around technology today, and that is that the people who create it expect that everybody will use it appropriately and intelligently. Can we change it? Absolutely, but not if we persist with the same failed approaches to change that we've used up until now. Again, I'm just blown away by this sanitation initiative in India, where they didn't just go and install a toilet in every building. They did that, but they embarked on a massive culture change to progressively bring every person in the nation to a mindset that said clean is good. And therefore the people dealt with everything that was not clean. I think I want to go to India now, see what it's like. I've never been there. I've heard dreadful stories in the past. They've changed. Things can change. Things can change immensely if you do it the right way, and understand that there are people and cultures and structures as much as there is physical assets and processes and tools. Australia has had several opportunities to fix it in its own right. We had this great announcement several years ago of a national broadband network. And at that point in time I thought, fantastic. If we can quickly get this national broadband network up and build it to be intrinsically secure from the start, then we'll be a leap ahead of the rest of the world. So what did we do instead? We went and selected the worst of everything that we already had, and we bolted it all together to make something that was even worse than what we previously owned. That's not the way to do it, and so clearly we had a failure on informed leadership. I don't expect that the Prime Minister of our nation knows anything about, or should know anything about, how to configure a router. But I do expect the Prime Minister of our nation to know that you can build things in a damn sight more secure way than previously has been, and to make sure that the best minds are to the forefront in making that happen. And I do expect the Prime Minister to make sure that everybody else in government is pushing towards a state where we have the best internet in the world. Instead, he went out and ate raw brown onions. What a joke. What an embarrassment for our nation.
Okay, now I don't want to verbal anybody, but I think we've got a no, it can't be fixed, and a yes, it can be fixed. Is that a... So I'm going to just quickly walk around. I just want to... I'm going to invite some comments and things, but just to begin with, this is a yes, no. Is it broken? If it's broken, can it be fixed?
Of course it's broken.
Can it be fixed?
Maybe.
Yeah, it's broken. Can it be fixed? I think it was meant to be broken.
I'm not sure it's broken or not. But if it's broken, we can fix it.
This can be fixed. I don't know. I'm from India. I don't know about the network here.
No, I'm thinking globally here. I'm not talking about Australia. I'm talking about the global.
It can be fixed. It can be, yeah.
It might be designed as a chaotic system, so it might not be fixed.
Okay, on the fence?
I'm hopeful it can be fixed.
A few more to go.
Can I ask you about the question again?
Well, the internet, IT systems, are they broken?
I don't know.
Okay, not sure.
It can be fixed, but it's everyone's role has a role in fixing it.
Good point. No. Okay, fair enough. Not sure.
I still think it can be fixed.
Can be fixed.
I don't believe it's broken. I think it's a natural evolution of technology as we've always had to cope with, and it can be fixed.
Okay. Our sponsor.
Yes, it can be fixed.
Beautiful. Okay.
Just before you dive any further there...
No, I'm coming back to see what your reaction to that is.
Yep, okay. So I've still got the mic, I've got the power. I'll give it to Mark in a moment. Melbourne and Sydney, if you look at them in 1970, were appalling designs in terms of traffic movement, getting people around. In 2019, they're just bad designs. It's been improved. We're on the way to change. If you were an urban architect, you would say the first problem with Sydney is I wouldn't have built it where it is. But given that it has been built, you have to evolve. Melbourne, it's a great place to build a city, just wouldn't have built it the way that it's happened. So again, it has to evolve. And any of us who've lived in either of those cities over the last 20 years or so have experienced progressive evolution of the people movement systems, particularly roads, freeways, but to some extent also rail and so on, that says that you can fix something while you're still using it, even if it's massive and incredibly complex. But the one thing that you need to have, if you're going to actually achieve something at the end, is you need to have a clear idea of where you're going. And I think that's part of what we don't have today. We have a lot of complaint about how bad the internet is. I don't know that we have a universally shared vision of what the internet could be.
Or ought to be. Mr. Jones.
Yeah, oh, that's a good point. So I should maybe clarify my position. If you look at the way, so you mentioned the thing about IT systems and the internet, I'm looking at the internet in the concept of trust between, coming from a military thing where it was point to point and we have a closed network that nobody else has access to, and we can communicate with protocol, and that kind of works to the point where we're at now, where there is trust models in place around when I'm communicating on the internet between one point and another, we have a way to sort of build some level of assurance that that other person or that other place is who they say they are and how that transaction is going to go down. That's assuming that we have a third-party intermediary that's managing certificates and authority points and how all of that happens. So over time, the internet has tried to build in points of trust and authority and points where we don't trust anyone intrinsically. So how can we put something there to get some, to get some faith around what's going on? Those models are, I'm working it. I see the breaks every single day, and even when something gets put in to fix it, or there's some other place around this new vulnerability or this new issue with how things are going to be set up, it's just a matter of time. I was saying to Mark, for nothing that I read now, and I literally every day there's stuff about the way the world works and how technology works surprises me. We're in a space now, like I said, the technology is everywhere. So obviously we want to use it. We want to use it and use it in a way that's positive for society and us as individuals, and how business interact and how we're working through this economy, not digital economy. I agree with you. That is part of it now. There's another whole cohort that's making a lot of money to find out ways to get around it. So when you look at the internet now, and you look what we all see as consumers and what we look at and how we go to Google, but then you break down what sits underneath that, it's crazy. And even the level that we work out, and people in my circles of friends, colleagues, call them whatever you want, when we get put into a place to say, how's that going? How's that working? Can we find ways to get comfort that it's going to just keep doing what it needs to do, and it's not going to get compromised. There's never a case when it's not compromised. It's just a matter of how long is it going to take, and how much control and what else have we put in place to mitigate when that does happen. So when I say the internet can't be fixed, there's so many levels that you would need to go through, from looking at the infrastructure that is supporting and pushing these packets around the world. How is that infrastructure? Who has built that? Where does it come from? What's the componentry? All of the circuitry, all of the code, everything that's put into place, there's a level of trust that's required. And it only takes one thing in that supply chain, in that process, to be a point of weakness, and that's it. And again, it's not an overt channel of like, haha, we broke the internet. Depending on the motivation and how it happens, these things never get disclosed. So I just want to say, nothing surprises me when the Snowden leaks happened, or when there's stuff that's released about one vendor versus another vendor. Of course, there are things that are happening that we have no idea about. We find them and we don't even publish them. We talk straight to the vendors, or we talk straight to our clients about stuff. So when I was saying about how security is a people problem, there's always flaws in code. There's always flaws in infrastructure. There's always things that can be found, made public, or found and not made public. And this model that we've built on is on that. It's on we've got this infrastructure and all of this managing what's happening and pushing things around the world, but it's all kind of evolved to the point of stuff that we've built on. So when I'm saying do it again, it'll be, from a governance perspective, we are absolutely, this is the way we're building it. So to Mark's point, this is what we want. 100% secure bastion hosts of, this is the way the traffic moves, this is the way it needs to work. There's no variance, there's no space. Any infrastructure has to go through this level. The people that manage it go through this level. There's no suppliers that can get involved. So that is a nirvana state from a security perspective, and how it all works would be fantastic. But it's not going to happen with what we're doing now. And even to roll out of it, you know, if you go, okay, we fix the infrastructure, we've got some new standards, we've got stuff, it's always been there. It's always been there. It's just a matter of, okay, people that are trying to get around it don't care about that. It's like that protocol and TCP/IP as one, or how you're trying to secure that. It's inherently flawed with how stuff. Look at Wi-Fi, worst thing ever. Like, sorry, it's fantastic, never meant to be built to be secure. So there's lots of things to go. If we're going to do it properly, it's not a refix and it's a band-aid. We'd be rebuilding. So I'm not saying that there can't be fixes and we're not working with them, but that's where I'm coming from. I see it every day, every single day, around the bad side of the internet and how and what we're doing. So that's to clarify my position.
Okay, now we've moved through a fair bit of territory. Before we have any questions, just a big one. Have we missed out anything? Is there anything we haven't talked about or should have talked about? Another word from our sponsor. Dr. Mark Gregory. I'm going to hold the microphone.
So I think possibly the thing that might help the conversation is to look at e-governance from the perspective, especially because we're talking about e-governance in business, to look at it from the perspective of government regulation of e-governance in business. So what I'm saying is that, for example, with data hacking, companies were just simply trying to brush all of this under the carpet, and companies had to be sort of threatened, and then eventually the government had to, to regulate, to say that if they've been hacked, they have to notify people, they have to take actions, otherwise there will be these big penalties. So what I'm saying is that, is there a need for government to increase regulation so that companies actually do implement e-governance, adequately?
Either Mark.
Yeah, I can add one thing to it before Mark has a go. That mandatory data breach notification was something, again, as an industry, we're pushing to say it's no longer just about if the company gets compromised. There's actually individuals that get impacted now if, I'll pick a company, NIB gets compromised, and all of their customers have now been leaked onto the dark web. They're getting traded and pushed between a whole bunch of people that are going to cause them a problem. NIB need to be, I'm not saying that they've got problems, but I'm just using them as an example. They need to be held accountable for it, and they need to do it. So that regulation come in, and it's helped and it's helping more when you have a board level discussion to go. It's not negotiable anymore. Securities and privacy is something you have to take serious.
Other Mark.
When something needs to change, there are only two things that will cause the change to happen. One is that the people who need to make the change recognise and accept that it's their job and they get on with it and do it. The other is that government gets out a big stick. David Rice wrote Economics, published in 2007, and he called the entire world population crash test dummies for information technology, and he drew parallels between IT and automobiles. And what he identified there was that automobile manufacturers around the world ignored all of the issues around crash safety and human safety in terms of motor cars until enough people made enough noise that government recognised that it was necessary to enforce the change. And what a change it's been. Government took the lead, government forced the change to happen, and we created a new culture of safety in transport where nobody in their right mind would now go and buy a car that doesn't have 5 stars of safety rating. I think that we are in that transition point now with what we quaintly call information technology. For years and years and years, the people who create the technology have absolved themselves of accountability for the safety and reliability and performance of the technology until the people have said, that's enough, we're fed up with this, now our personal safety is being threatened, government, go and do your job.
Which brings me back to the perspective that I put earlier on, which is my challenge to the IT world, is if you don't fix it, governments will intervene and they will do something to it, which is another word that starts with F.
Exactly as the automobile industry did, the first safety shifts in the automobile industry were appallingly bad. But they needed to be bad because A, the government's not competent to get it right, and B, the automobile industry needed to recognise that only it could get it right, and therefore it had better get its act together.
Now, we've got a couple of people who want to speak, but Henry Wolfe is from the University of Otago in New Zealand, which means that he's got better broadband than us.
My comments were for earlier, but it might be instructive to understand the origin of the internet. When Lawrence Robert put the first 4 hosts together in 1969, that was the precursor to it. And the whole idea of the internet, ARPANET at the point, was meant to be a fault-tolerant system. So if one host failed, the whole system didn't fail. Prior to that, it did. And I used it from 1970 onward. And none of us could have imagined at that time anything that we could have seen today. So today is an evolution of something that was very primitive at the beginning, meant to allow us to do some primitive communications between computers. And it's evolved from that. There's been no plan. I don't think anybody here can say there was a plan there. And it's evolved to what it is today. So can it be fixed? Well, it'll have to evolve into a better system.
And that's what the motor car's done.
Yeah.
Yep. That's what the motor car has done.
Okay. Now, Alexander Norta is from Estonia. He was speaking earlier in the day, or he knows a lot about Estonia, so I'm sure he's going to tell us something.
Well, I'm sure the real Estonian knows much more about Estonia than me just living there, but I was a bit surprised about the panel, and maybe the missing speaker would have raised the issue talking about governance, e-governance, and business. So the essence of business is the entrepreneur. So it's not just large structural companies that are in some public-private partnership, which Mussolini would have known what to call it. But if we go back to the roots of entrepreneurship, in Estonia it's possible to start the company in half an hour on the internet, or I think some did it even faster, like 20 minutes. And then you are pretty much supported by the governance, by the IT governance that's in place, at least in Estonia, to run your business in a very free market way. And I thought the panel would actually go much more into this than just these hard-coded structures of long existing mega industries that are in bed with government. So I was a bit surprised to not hear anything about that.
Before the panel comment, I might just make a disclosure that I am doing some work at the moment with AUDA, A-U-D-A, which is the Australian organisation that manages our domain names. And I was in Canberra yesterday to brief members of Parliament and senators on a proposal to move to what's called direct registration, which is yourcompanyname.au, leaving out the com or the gov, which has occurred in other countries. So if there's anybody here from another country where that has already occurred, I'd certainly be interested in your point of view. But where I think it relates to Alexander's comment, one of the questions that came from one of the members of Parliament was about the rules and regulations that dictate who can have a domain name. and how that then relates to people dealing with that company, and what guarantees do you have dealing with a company through the internet, or dealing with a company that is on the internet that has a domain name that's registered in the country where you are versus some organisation that might be based here but has a .com. So I'm just interested in anybody's views on the relationship between domain names and security on the internet.
Well, I guess there's, depending on how that stuff's registered and where they're hosted and how things work. It doesn't stop me. You can be anywhere and do anything in terms of registering stuff, depending on how and what you've got in terms of connection into some of those other countries and registering a business, I guess. But from a domain name perspective, I don't really have much to add to that. But in terms of that's really interesting to see about from setting up a new business and then getting provided support and structure around governance of that from an IT perspective. And if you're starting something small and outsourcing parts of your environment could allow you to focus on the bits, and then how to manage and control that properly. I think we do have support. I know from certain industry perspective, our governments provide some guidance and support ideas, but it's not really do this, do that, and otherwise there's these penalties, or this is what you have to follow. It's more some structure. I know APRA has started to release a few things which sometimes have been, which is a regulatory body for finance group, around wishy-washy kind of statements and no teeth, but now they're starting to get really specific around this must happen, and this is the way to do it, and this is how you get audited, and this is how things will get checked. So, but again, on the flip side of how, is there any teeth behind that? Because as a business, I can say, I'm going to get to that, I've made these decisions, I'm mitigating this, I'm running that. So the intention of the standard or the regulation is one thing, how it's applied in the real world can be, depending who you're talking to, can be a different way that's happening. So, I don't know. I haven't got much.
Mark, do you have something to say?
I'm just thinking, I wish I had $1 for every time I've had an email from a Chinese internet registry inviting me to buy my company name .something or other .cn, because somebody has just applied for that name and they see that I already have the .com.au version of it. Internet domain names are the Wild West. There was clearly some very insightful thought put into the original design, but there was no control added to that original design, and so the whole thing became chaotic probably days after the design was published. And it's now totally out of control, and I don't know why we bother with trying to have comms and orgs and edus and so on. I think we should just, as the proposal sounds like it is, scrap them all and go to organisation.au, and at the same time the world might insist that the US adopt .us on the back of theirs, because somebody was talking about trying to analyse links in government government websites earlier today, and they can't, because .com, which defaults to that's the US, is so pervasive.
So just a point of clarification, so the proposal wouldn't scrap the...
I understand that. You can't just burn that straight away.
But one of the issues that needs to be debated is who gets the direct registration. Does that go to somebody who already has the .com.au or the .net.au? There's a discussion paper on the ALDA website, which I think is alda.org.au, and if anybody is interested and has a view on this, I know AUDA would be very keen because they're engaged in a very large consultation process, which is why we were in Canberra yesterday. All right.
Before we go any further, Laurie, can I just pick up on something that Alexander said about the perception that somehow came through that the governance of IT standard, the governance of digital evolution, is focused on established organisations. Far from it. And one of the things that is often said to refute the validity of having guidance for governance of small, nimble, lean organisations is that puts the shackles on them and stops them from being nimble and lean. I will absolutely agree that if you try to put what the IT industry has in the past called governance, things like COBIT and ITIL and all of those outdated, freakishly complex methodologies, you will destroy the capacity of a small, nimble organisation to be what it is. But if you understand that governance is about making sure that the right things happen in the right way that is appropriate for your context and situation, and that governance is better implemented by guiding principles that define your appropriate behaviour rather than strict methods and controls and so on, then it can actually go completely the other way and greatly facilitate the development and growth of an organisation. I've run a one-person company for 20 years. I follow those principles. I make sure that I know who's responsible for what, and sometimes it's not me. And on. I make sure that I revisit strategy. I translate strategy into plans. They don't have to be incredibly detailed. I can do it on the back of an envelope because that's all that I need, but I do need to spend the time thinking about it. And so the way the whole thing is designed is to be actually useful for everybody.
Other Mark?
That's a really good point. So the point, I like the idea that it's there and it's in place, and there are frameworks and things that are pushed out again, but I agree, going into a small business and talking about these are great IT governance structures or governance structures from do all this kind of stuff, but that would absolutely, a small business or a new business they'd just look at that and push it aside. So I like the fact if there's a really simple way to do it or some ways to adapt it that are relevant to a small business or a small medium business, that's really good. And then all of the other things that come as part of just good general governance fall into place. But I haven't. But again, I work in one sort of silo of information, but that would be pretty cool.
All right, now because we are one panellist short, we're a bit early, and we'll probably end up having a bit of an early mark anyway. But is there anything else? Is there something we haven't covered? Because otherwise I'm going to throw another hand grenade into the audience. We do have, yes, we have some. Sorry, Asaf.
Yes, so we were talking about internet governance, something maybe controversial that I perceive, see what you think about it. So in Western countries like Australia, it seems that the only party who is able to exercise governance on the internet is Google. And that is because they are the gateway to internet for most internet users. What do you think about that?
That's the parcel.
Need some think time, do you, Mark? Look, I'm intrigued at the commentary, not about Google, but about Facebook, and the big essay that Mark Zuckerberg wrote recently about how important it is that we start to actually drive some good behaviour around the use of social media. And I haven't read his paper yet, but I've seen lots of comments that say, that's good for everybody, but it doesn't actually touch Facebook's own problematic behaviour. Google doesn't behave any better than Facebook. Nor does Microsoft. Nor does anybody else that provides us with tools and technology. Sony Xperia. I'm sure Sony know a hell of a lot more about me than I would like them to know. Can I control it? Well, yeah, I could. I could burn the phone and go back to a hand dialing Bakelite thing. I know I have to, for the time being, pay the price for the convenience, and I've got some inkling of what the price is, so I can make a semi-informed decision. The point that David Rice was making, and I think he's absolutely right, is that none of the software giants is going to do anything to change their own behaviour, and therefore they're not going to do anything to change the behaviour of anybody else on the network. And, if I wanted to identify a conflicted community without casting other nasturtiums on them, aspersions for those who don't do Australian slang, how many internet security companies wouldn't exist if we actually had a secure internet?
Ooh. Before Mark has his comment, can I just tell you, I just want to relate a recurring dream that I have. I wake up in a cold sweat realising how silly I was. It goes something like this. Email to, you mentioned one brand, so I'll mention Apple. Dear Apple, please find attached my marked up copy of your terms and conditions with my suggested amendments. You know what the reply would be.
Yes, sir.
There'll be no response. Cool, no problem. We've got 1 billion other customers that, they're happy with it. My view on as a group like that, I love I talk to people, I sort of spend time talking around the use of social media and these other these providers where there's a reason why a lot of their stuff is free, because we're the product. Our stuff we are the products. So in terms of a governance perspective, and if we could control and how that sort of would work, that's again, like what Mark said, it's fundamentally changing the way that business has come to be what it's to be. And if you start to put again two big powers against the Australian government v Google, I don't think there would be a discussion. They would stick with their business model and try and shift it, and maybe it would be with the Australian government, or as a society we push back on it, but then I know what I would be doing, just getting VPNs and popping out to other places and trying to get all the services happening again. So I don't know about that.